James sat at his desk, the soft hum of the computer his only company in the dimly lit room. The pile of textbooks, notebooks, and scattered papers seemed to close in around him, a physical manifestation of the pressure weighing on his shoulders. Outside, the world moved on without him. The laughter of children playing, the distant sound of a lawnmower, the chirping of birds. But James was trapped in a cocoon of expectations and anxiety. "James!" His mother's voice pierced the silence, pulling him back to reality. "Have you finished your math homework?" "Almost, Mom," James replied, though he hadn't even started. His eyes darted to the clock. It was already 8 p.m. Another night of studying late into the night lay ahead. His father walked into the room, his face a mask of stern determination. "James, your mother and I expect you to get into a good college. You know how important your grades are." "I know, Dad," James said, trying to keep his voice steady. He knew this conversation all too well. It was the same every evening. James's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were well-meaning but demanding. They believed in the value of hard work and had high expectations for their only son. They wanted the best for him, but their vision of the best was narrow and unyielding. To them, success was synonymous with academic excellence and a prestigious college acceptance letter. "Remember, James, we sacrificed a lot for you to attend this private school," Mrs. Thompson often reminded him. "You have to make the most of it." James nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He didn't want to disappoint them. He understood their sacrifices and appreciated their efforts, but the pressure was suffocating. Every grade that wasn't an A felt like a failure, every test a hurdle he struggled to overcome. It was a Tuesday evening when James reached his breaking point. He had just received his calculus test back, a dreaded B glaring at him from the top of the paper. His heart sank, and he felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his chest. How would he tell his parents? Dinner was a quiet affair, the tension in the air palpable. James pushed his food around his plate, barely touching it. "James, what's wrong?" Mr. Thompson finally asked, noticing his son's unusual silence. James took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I got my calculus test back today," he began. "And?" His mother's eyes were fixed on him, a mixture of hope and apprehension. "I got a B," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Thompson's expression darkened, and Mrs. Thompson's face fell. "A-B, James," his father said, disappointment lacing his words. "You know how important your grades are. You need to be at the top of your class if you want to get into a good college." James couldn't hold it in any longer. "I'm trying my best, Dad," he burst out, tears welling up in his eyes. "I study every night until I can barely keep my eyes open. I'm exhausted and stressed all the time. I can't keep doing this." His parents were stunned into silence by his outburst. They had never seen James so emotional, so vulnerable. Mrs. Thompson reached out to touch his arm, but he pulled away. "We're just trying to help you succeed, James," she said softly. "By making me miserable?" James shot back, his voice breaking. "I'm drowning in all this pressure. I can't breathe. I can't think. I can't do this anymore." He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, and stormed out of the dining room. He needed to escape, to find a moment of peace away from the relentless pressure and expectations. James found solace in the park near their house. He sat on a bench, the cool evening breeze calming his frayed nerves. He didn't know how long he sat there, but eventually his parents found him. "James," his father began, sitting down beside him, "we're sorry. We didn't realize how much we were pushing you." His mother joined them, her eyes filled with tears. "We just want you to have a bright future, James. We didn't mean to make you feel like this." James looked at them, seeing the concern and guilt etched on their faces. "I know you want what's best for me, but I can't handle this much pressure. I need to find a balance." His parents nodded, understanding dawning on them. They had been so focused on their goals for James that they had lost sight of his well-being. The days that followed were a turning point for James and his parents. They had long conversations about his future, his dreams, and his needs. They realized that while academics were important, so was James's mental health and happiness. Mr. Thompson approached James one evening with a book on time management and stress relief. "Maybe this can help you manage your workload better," he suggested. James smiled, appreciating the gesture. "Thanks, Dad." Mrs. Thompson started encouraging James to pursue hobbies and interests outside of school. "You used to love drawing," she said one afternoon. "Why don't you take some time to get back into it?" James felt a weight lift off his shoulders. With his parents' support and understanding, he began to find a healthier balance between school and personal life. He still worked hard, but he no longer felt the overwhelming pressure that had once consumed him. James's grades improved, not because he was studying harder, but because he was studying smarter. He learned to manage his time effectively, taking breaks when needed and not pushing himself to the brink of exhaustion. He found joy in his hobbies again, spending time drawing and playing basketball with friends. His parents also changed. They became more attuned to James's needs and more supportive of his choices. They still encouraged him to do his best, but they no longer equated his worth with his academic performance. James's relationship with his parents strengthened as they navigated this new understanding together. The pressure that had once threatened to break him was replaced by a supportive environment that allowed him to thrive. As college application season approached, James felt more confident and prepared. He applied to a range of schools, including some that weren't at the top of his parents' list, but felt right for him. His parents supported his choices, trusting that he knew what was best for his future. When acceptance letters began to arrive, the house was filled with excitement and anticipation. James's hard work paid off, and he received offers from several prestigious universities. But more importantly, he felt ready to take the next step in his life without the crushing weight of unrealistic expectations. On the evening he decided which college to attend, James sat down with his parents. "Thank you for understanding," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without your support." Mr. Thompson smiled, placing a hand on James's shoulder. "We're proud of you, James, not just for your grades, but for who you are." Mrs. Thompson hugged him tightly. "We love you, James, and we always will.